A millionaire single father arrived to pick up his daughter, never expecting she'd introduce him to her sister and ask to bring her home. The late afternoon sunlight bounced off the tall glass windows of the private elementary school as Carter parked his sleek black sedan at the curb. Dressed in a light blue tailored suit that mirrored the clear October sky, he stepped out of the car with quiet precision. His dark brown hair was neatly styled, and his deep brown eyes were focused, yet gentle. Everything about him conveyed a sense of calm control, a man accustomed to having all the answers, except when it came to his daughter. Every Tuesday and Thursday, no matter how busy his schedule or how intense the meetings in the boardroom, Andrew made it a point to personally pick up his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, from school. It wasn't a chore or obligation. It was a promise, one of the few that had survived the storm of grief after his wife passed away during childbirth. Lily meant everything to him. He scanned the schoolyard, expecting the usual sight. Lily standing with her red plaid vest slightly askew, her ponytail half undone from recess, her bright smile wide enough to light up even the darkest of days. But this time, something was different. She wasn't alone. As he drew closer, his gaze landed on an unfamiliar girl beside Lily. She looked to be about the same age, perhaps 6, with messy blonde hair, large blue eyes that seemed too big for her delicate face, and bare feet tucked under her legs as she sat on the pavement. Her white dress was worn, and the oversized denim jacket she wore seemed more like something she'd found than something given to her. Though she wasn't crying, there was an air of stillness around her that spoke volumes of a sadness she carried. Yet, she was sitting closely next to Lily, their shoulders almost touching. Andrew walked closer and crouched down before them. Before he could speak, Lily turned to him with a serious yet calm expression, gripping the other girl's hand tightly. "Daddy, I found my sister," she said. Andrew's mind raced, unsure of what she meant, unsure of how to respond. "Sister?" he asked, his voice gentle yet filled with confusion. Then, the blonde girl looked up at him, her big eyes filled with both hope and uncertainty, and whispered, "Daddy?" The words hit him like a weight in his chest, low and deep, as though something he hadn't realized was missing shifted suddenly. She didn't say it as though she believed he already was her father. She said it as if, maybe, just maybe, he could be. He glanced at Lily, who was already wrapping her arm protectively around the girl. "Her name's Emma," Lily said. "She doesn't have a mommy right now. She said her mommy's really sick in the hospital and nobody comes to pick her up. The other kids are mean to her. They push her. They laugh. But I like her. She's nice, and I want her to come home with us." Andrew remained crouched, still trying to process what he was hearing. But he couldn't ignore what he was seeing. 2 girls clinging to each other as if they'd known one another for ages, despite meeting only a few weeks ago. One full of light, the other dimmed by more sadness than any child should carry. "I thought," Lily continued, "if she's my sister now, then maybe you're her daddy too." Andrew didn't respond immediately. There was no easy answer, no clear solution. But when he looked back at Emma, who was watching him with a fragile blend of hope and fear, he knew the truth. He had come to pick up one daughter, but he might have just found another. And no matter what happened next, he wasn't going to walk away. The next morning began like any other in the Carter household, the soft hum of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Lily at the table, coloring in her workbook, her legs swinging rhythmically beneath the chair. But for Andrew, the air felt different, heavier. He couldn't stop thinking about Emma. Her eyes had followed him in his sleep, wide and silent, asking a question he still didn't know how to answer. The day before, after getting the school's permission, he had tucked both girls into the backseat of the car and taken Emma home with them. Temporarily, she hadn't said much on the drive. She simply sat close to Lily, clutching an old teddy bear that had clearly seen better days. Her small frame curled up as if trying to shrink into the seat. Now, As he stood by the kitchen window, watching the clouds roll in over the skyline, Andrew was left to figure out what came next. Emma was still asleep in the guest room, or rather, what had once been the guest room, now hastily turned into a place for both girls. Extra pillows, Lily's old stuffed animals, and the softest blanket they could find filled the room. Emma hadn't eaten much the night before, just a few bites of pasta and a glass of water, but she hadn't cried. That was the part that unsettled him the most. There were no tears, just silence. But Lily, on the other hand, was filled with energy. As if adopting a sister on the school sidewalk were the most normal thing in the world, she chatted excitedly about what snacks she wanted to pack for Emma's lunch and asked if they could go buy matching jackets over the weekend. She had even made a name tag for Emma and taped it to the bedroom door, written in bright purple crayon with stars around the edges. Andrew sat across from her at the table, his coffee untouched. "Lily," he said gently, "do you know where Emma's been staying since her mom got sick?" Lily tilted her head, thinking. She said it was a place with people, but not a real home. She doesn't like it there. They forget her sometimes. Andrew's jaw tightened. He'd heard enough about overcrowded shelters and overwhelmed foster homes to understand what forgetting really meant. It was one thing to read about those issues in the news. It was another to see it sitting quietly in his home, wrapped in his daughter's pink blanket. Later that morning, when Emma woke up, she tiptoed into the kitchen, wearing the same denim jacket from the day before. Her hair was a little neater now, likely from Lily's attempts to brush it. She looked around nervously until her eyes met Andrew's. She didn't say anything, but she didn't run either. That was a start. "Good morning, Emma," Andrew said, crouching down to her eye level. "Would you like some breakfast?" She glanced at Lily for reassurance, and when Lily nodded enthusiastically, she whispered, "Yes." They made waffles together. Andrew let the girls pour the batter and showed Emma how to add blueberries without crushing them. She didn't smile, but she focused intently, and when he gave her a high five after her first perfect waffle, her expression twitched slightly, as if a muscle long unused was starting to remember how to move. After breakfast, he called the school to explain that both girls would be staying home for the day. Then, he dialed another number, Child Protective Services. He needed to understand where Emma was supposed to be, what her legal status was, and if anyone had reported her missing. He was told a social worker would be in touch. The answer didn't satisfy him, but it was all he had for now. Throughout the day, Emma stayed close to Lily. They played in the living room, drew pictures, and watched a cartoon together under a blanket. Andrew watched from the kitchen, quietly struck by how natural it all felt, how quickly Lily had welcomed Emma into her world, and how easily Emma had accepted it. It was as if the bond had been formed before he even had time to question it. Later, when Lily went to the bathroom, Emma wandered into Andrew's study. He looked up from his laptop as she stood just inside the doorway. "Is it okay if I stay here?" she asked. He closed his laptop and nodded. "Of course." She stepped closer, but didn't sit. Her small hands gripped the sleeves of her jacket, and for a moment, she looked like she was gathering the courage to say something. "Lily says, 'You're the best, Daddy,'" she said. Andrew didn't answer immediately, his throat tightening. He hadn't heard her say more than 5 words in a row until now. He stood slowly and walked around the desk, kneeling down so they were eye to eye. "I try to be the kind of dad she deserves," he said softly. Emma looked at the floor. "Can people have more than one daddy?" He smiled gently. "Sometimes families are made in different ways. What matters is love, not who was there first." She looked up at him again, but this time it wasn't with fear. It was with something he could only describe as quiet hope. "Okay," she said, then walked back out, calm, as if something had finally settled inside her. That night, after both girls were asleep, Andrew sat alone on the couch, staring out at the city lights. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be forms to sign, questions to answer, maybe even battles to fight. But he also knew, just as Lily had said, that families weren't always born. Sometimes they were chosen, and sometimes they chose you. 3 days had passed since Emma first entered Andrew's home, and already the rhythm of the household had changed in ways he hadn't expected. Mornings were no longer quiet and efficient. Now, they were filled with overlapping voices, spilled orange juice, 2 sets of tiny shoes by the door, and a constant flow of questions from Lily, most of which Emma now echoed. There was laughter where there had once been silence, crumbs on the floor where there had once been spotless wood. In the middle of it all, Andrew found himself relearning fatherhood. Not because he had forgotten, but because this was different. Loving Lily had always been second nature. Loving Emma was like learning a language he never expected to speak, but it was coming to him faster than he'd imagined. By the 3rd morning, Emma no longer hesitated to join them at the breakfast table. She still sat close to Lily. Her movements, cautious, but the way she looked at Andrew had changed. She no longer stared at him like he might disappear. Now, she observed him with curiosity, measuring the tone of his voice, the kindness in his eyes, and the gentleness in his hands as he poured her juice without asking if she wanted it first. Trust was being built, layer by layer, fragile, but real. After breakfast, Andrew received a call from Child Protective Services. A caseworker named Ms. Dunley was scheduled to visit the next day. Her tone was polite but curt. She clearly saw this as a situation to be dealt with, not embraced. Andrew understood. He wasn't related to Emma. He had no legal claim. From the outside, it probably looked like he'd just brought a stranger's child into his home on a whim. He knew how these things worked. Systems didn't see stories. They saw boxes, checklists, and liabilities. Later that day, while the girls were coloring in the living room, Andrew stepped into his office and began gathering documents. He printed school reports, Lily's health records, financial information, anything he thought might prove he was stable, trustworthy, and capable. But as he looked over the neatly stacked papers, a strange sadness settled in his chest. These files told everything about his income, real estate holdings, and education. But they said nothing about the way Emma had laughed earlier that morning when Lily dropped her spoon and made a silly face to make her laugh. They said nothing about how, for the first time, Emma had reached for his hand when crossing the street. Nothing about how his heart had reacted when she whispered, "Thank you." Without being prompted, that evening, Emma asked if she could help make dinner. She stood on a step stool beside him, small hands gripping a plastic knife as she carefully sliced strawberries for dessert. It was slow work and messy, but Andrew didn't rush her. Instead, he watched her. How focused she was. How proud she looked every time she made a clean slice. Lily was in the living room pretending to host a talk show with a hairbrush as her microphone. The house, for all its chaos, had never felt more alive. As they sat down to eat together, Emma finally asked. The question Andrew had known would come. What happens if my mommy doesn't wake up? The fork froze in his hand. Lily looked at him too, wide-eyed, waiting. Andrew took a slow breath. Well, he said, sometimes people take longer than we hope to get better. But no matter what happens, you're not going to be alone. Emma nodded slowly, chewing her food without looking up. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. I used to be scared all the time, but I'm not scared here. Andrew didn't know how to respond to that. He simply reached across the table and gently touched her hand. She didn't pull away. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Lily sprawled across her bed with stuffed animals scattered everywhere. Emma curled into a tight ball, the blanket pulled up to her ears. Andrew sat on the edge of the guest bed, staring at the moonlight pooling on the floor. He thought about Rachel, Emma's mother. He had never met her, didn't know what kind of woman she had been or what dreams she had for her daughter. He only knew that she was somewhere in a hospital bed, unaware that her child had found comfort in the home of a stranger. And he thought about the idea of right and wrong as the law saw it, how it often failed to understand things that couldn't be measured, things like bonds that formed not through blood, but through care, presence, and choice. Andrew didn't know what the caseworker would say tomorrow, but he knew what he would say. He wasn't here to replace Emma's mother. He wasn't here to make her forget. He was here because she deserved to feel safe, because she deserved someone who would stay. And if the system didn't understand that, he would teach it. The next morning arrived under a gray sky that seemed to mirror Andrew's thoughts. The house was unusually quiet for a weekday. It was the kind of quiet that came not from peace, but from anticipation. The visit from Child Protective Services was scheduled for 10 a.m., and although Andrew had hosted executives, city officials, and international investors in his home over the years, this was the first time he found himself nervously pacing the living room, straightening already straight picture frames, and fluffing pillows that didn't need fluffing. It wasn't about appearance. It was about what was at stake. Upstairs, the girls were getting dressed. Lily had picked matching outfits for her and Emma. Blue dresses with little white stars and white tights. She said it was to look like sisters, and Andrew hadn't had the heart to suggest otherwise. When they came downstairs, Emma clutched Lily's hand tightly, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She had overheard part of his phone call the day before and knew, at least vaguely, that someone was coming to ask questions. Andrew knelt in front of them and said gently, "You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Okay? Just be yourselves. That's more than enough." At exactly 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. Andrew opened the door to find a tall woman in her mid-40s with short blonde hair, thick glasses, and a clipboard pressed tightly to her chest. Her badge identified her as Melissa Dunley, CPS case officer. She offered a polite but restrained smile, clearly trying to keep the visit as neutral and professional as possible. "Mr. Carter," she said briskly, "thank you for your time." He welcomed her inside, offered her coffee, which she declined, and led her into the sitting room where the girls were waiting. Emma stood behind Lily at first, half hiding, but Lily gently tugged her forward and whispered, "It's okay. She's just here to meet you." Melissa took a seat across from them and glanced at her clipboard. "Emma, is it okay if I ask you a couple of questions?" Emma nodded slowly, her hands still gripping Lily's. "Do you feel safe here?" Melissa asked. Emma nodded again. "Do you like living with Mr. Carter?" This time, Emma whispered, "Yes." Melissa glanced briefly at Andrew before continuing. "Has he ever made you feel afraid or uncomfortable?" Emma shook her head firmly and then surprised everyone by saying, "He makes pancakes with us. He never yells and he checks on me at night." The social worker raised her eyebrows, clearly taken aback by the clarity and confidence of the answer. She scribbled something quickly on her form. After the girls were excused to play upstairs, Melissa turned to Andrew and asked the more formal questions. His employment status, criminal record, none, home security, emergency plans, and his intention for Emma's long-term care. "I don't want to foster her temporarily," Andrew said plainly. "I want to be whatever she needs for as long as she needs it. If her mother recovers and wants her back, I'll respect that. But until then, I want to give her a real home. Not just a roof and meals. Safety. Belonging." Melissa tapped her pen against the clipboard. "You understand, Mr. Carter. This is highly unusual. You have no legal connection to this child, no background in foster care. This will require extensive review." "I understand the system," he said evenly, "but I also understand children. I've watched this one start to breathe again in just 3 days. That should count for something." The caseworker didn't argue. She simply stood, thanked him, and said she'd be in touch after submitting her report. Before leaving, She peeked into the hallway and saw Emma at the top of the stairs, watching. "I'll do what I can," she said softly, more to herself than to Andrew. After she left, the house remained still for a moment. Andrew finally exhaled and went upstairs, where both girls were back in Lily's room, coloring side by side. Emma looked up. "Is she taking me away?" "No," Andrew said without hesitation. "She's just learning what I already know. That you belong here." Emma didn't smile. She simply nodded and went back to her drawing. But later, as she passed him in the hallway, she slipped her small hand into his and held on a little longer than usual. He didn't say a word. He just squeezed back. That night, while tucking her into bed, Emma looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. "Do I have to go back to the place with the gray doors?" "No," he said gently, brushing hair from her forehead. "Not if I can help it." Emma nodded once and rolled over, pulling Lily's old stuffed bunny to her chest. Within minutes, she was asleep. Andrew sat in the hallway for a while after that. Not because he had to, but because it felt like the right thing to do. He didn't have all the answers, and there were no guarantees. But something in his gut told him that Emma wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. Over the next week, the air in the Carter home shifted from cautious to familiar, and Emma began to move through the house with a confidence that hadn't been there before. She still had moments of hesitation when the phone rang too suddenly, or if someone knocked on the door, but they were less frequent. Her silences were no longer filled with fear. She had started humming as she colored. She called for Lily by name instead of whispering, and on the fourth night, she began calling Andrew Daddy without prompting, quietly, as if testing how the word felt in her mouth. He hadn't responded immediately, afraid of overwhelming her with emotion. But later, when she asked for help, reaching the toothpaste and said, "Daddy, can you?" He looked at her and simply replied, "Of course, sweetheart." He had spent several late nights reviewing paperwork, making calls, and consulting with legal professionals. He learned that Emma's mother, Rachel Green, was still in a coma, though her condition was stable. She had no immediate family, no listed emergency contacts, and the foster system had placed Emma temporarily in a group care home with minimal supervision. Emma had wandered away from the facility multiple times. It wasn't until Andrew reported her presence that CPS even flagged her as missing. The realization hit him hard. This little girl had fallen through the cracks of a system meant to protect her. He hired a private advocate, a former family law attorney named Monica Fields, to guide him through the legal maze of temporary guardianship. Monica was tough, precise, and honest. She didn't sugarcoat the reality. The system wasn't designed for men like Andrew. Single, unrelated, unlicensed foster candidates. She explained that, even though his financial and emotional stability were undeniable, bureaucracy didn't move quickly, especially in unconventional cases. He could expect months of evaluations, home visits, and court reviews. But Andrew was patient. He had built an empire from the ground up with discipline and grit. If paperwork was the price to pay for Emma's peace, then so be it. He submitted every form, let CPS inspect his home again, interviewed with a child psychologist, and gave full access to his background. Meanwhile, the girls grew inseparable. They shared secrets, snacks, and pajamas. Lily taught Emma how to braid hair, and Emma taught Lily how to fold paper animals. One morning, Andrew overheard them playing family. In the living room, Lily was the big sister, Emma, the baby, and a row of stuffed animals served as students in a pretend school. At one point, Emma paused and asked, "What if my real mommy wakes up?" Lily, without missing a beat, replied, "Then she'll be proud you found a second home too." Andrew had to step away before they noticed the emotion in his eyes. One Friday afternoon, Andrew received a call from the hospital. Rachel Green had regained consciousness. The words hit him like a sudden gust of wind. He sat down slowly, processing what this could mean for Emma. Relief and uncertainty collided in his chest. This was what they had all been waiting for. Or, at least what the law had. But emotionally, he wasn't sure where it left any of them. The next morning, he sat down with the girls at breakfast. "Emma," he said carefully, "your mommy woke up. She's still very weak, but the doctor said she can speak. Would you like to go visit her?" Emma froze, her fork hovering above her plate. Her face didn't show joy or fear, only confusion. "Do I have to go back with her?" she asked. "Not today," he said gently. "You'll just visit. She wants to see you, that's all." Lily reached across the table and held Emma's hand. "I'll come too." "Okay." Emma looked at Andrew for confirmation. He nodded. So they went together. The hospital room was sterile and quiet, filled with the beep of machines and the smell of antiseptic. Rachel lay in bed, pale and weak. Her eyes were glassy but aware. When Emma walked in, she froze in the doorway for several seconds, then ran to her mother's side, burying her face in the blanket. Rachel raised a shaky hand and touched her daughter's head. "I missed you," she whispered hoarsely. Andrew stepped back, giving them space, but his heart was racing. This was not just a reunion. It was a question hanging in the air. Would Rachel want Emma back? Could she care for her? Later, when they left, Emma was unusually quiet. In the car, she looked out the window for a long time before saying, "She's still my mommy, but it didn't feel like before." She felt far away. Andrew reached back and gently squeezed her hand. "You don't have to understand it all right now," he said. "Just know that you are loved no matter what." That night, Emma asked to sleep in Lily's room. They curled up together in one bed, whispering until they fell asleep. Andrew stood in the doorway, watching them, thinking about how love didn't always follow rules. It didn't check boxes or ask for permission. It just showed up, stayed, and held on. The next few days passed in a haze of quiet tension and uncertain waiting. Though Rachel was awake and slowly recovering, no immediate decisions had been made regarding Emma's custody. Andrew was in frequent communication with both Monica and CPS, trying to stay as involved and informed as possible without crossing any legal lines. He knew everything could change at any moment. Rachel now had the legal right, as Emma's mother, to request her child be returned to her care. Yet, doctors were still evaluating whether she was capable of that, either physically or emotionally. No one had a clear answer yet. And for now, Emma remained with Andrew and Lily, still sleeping with her arms wrapped around the stuffed bunny she'd come to treat like a lifeline. Andrew didn't speak about the situation around Emma unless she brought it up. He didn't want her to live in fear of being torn away again. Instead, he tried to keep their days normal. School drop-offs, art projects after dinner, story time before bed. Lily helped too. Perhaps without even realizing it, she created an emotional buffer for Emma, keeping her laughing, occupied, and protected. Andrew had never seen two children bond so completely in such a short time. It was as though Emma had always belonged there. He couldn't imagine the house without her soft footsteps, her whispering voice calling, "Daddy." In the morning, her presence curled on the couch beside Lily after dinner. It was the same. But something changed on the fourth night after Rachel's awakening. Andrew received a call from Monica just after 7 p.m. Her voice was calm, but he heard the weight in it. "Rachel's requesting a supervised meeting with you and Emma. She wants to talk face-to-face, just adults. No pressure on Emma. The hospital's arranging it." Andrew agreed immediately. He didn't feel threatened by Rachel's return. If anything, he felt sorrow for her. He couldn't imagine waking up from a coma to find out your daughter had been living with strangers. He didn't want to fight her. He wanted to understand her. Maybe they both wanted the same thing. For Emma to be safe, stable, loved. Maybe they could find common ground. The next afternoon, Andrew drove to the hospital alone. He brought no papers, no lawyer, no agenda. Just himself. Rachel was sitting up in bed this time, her arms frail, but her posture straighter. Her hair was duller than in the picture he'd seen in Emma's file. Her cheeks were hollow, but her eyes were piercing. She looked like a woman who had once fought hard for her child, and maybe still would if she had the strength. They spoke for almost an hour. Rachel asked questions, not aggressive ones, but hesitant, careful ones. What did Emma eat? Did she sleep through the night? Did she call him daddy? Andrew answered honestly. He told her about the night Emma cried in her sleep and how she stopped flinching at loud noises after a week. He shared how Lily had adopted her like a twin and how he'd started thinking in terms of 2 daughters instead of 1. Rachel was quiet for a long time. She used to hide behind my legs when she was scared. She finally said, "She hasn't had an easy life. Neither have I." Andrew didn't interrupt. He just listened. "I didn't want to end up in that hospital." Rachel added, her voice trembling. "Oh, but I did. And I can't pretend I can just get up and take her back. I don't even have a place to go home to." There it was, the unspoken truth. Rachel loved her daughter, but love didn't always equal readiness. She had no job, no home, and barely enough strength to stand. "I want to do what's right for her," she said, her voice cracking. "Even if that means she stays with you." Andrew swallowed hard. He hadn't expected that. Not so soon, not so directly. "I'm not trying to replace you," he said. "I just want to give her what she needs while you recover. And if that takes a long time, or if you decide to let go, I'll keep loving her like my own." Rachel closed, her eyes. A tear slipped out and traced a line down her pale cheek. "Just promise me," she whispered. "Don't let her forget me. Even if she stops asking. Even if she gets used to you. Show her a photo sometimes. Tell her I sang to her. Remind her I tried." Andrew stood and took a slow step toward the bed. He didn't touch her, but he met her eyes. "I promise," he said. When he left the hospital, the sky had begun to change. The sun was lowering behind the buildings, casting golden light through the windshield. For the first time in days, Andrew didn't feel tension clawing at his spine. Rachel hadn't given a final answer, but she'd given him something just as powerful: her trust. And it was that trust that gave him hope that they could find a path forward together, one built not on competition, but care. That night, when he returned home, both girls were playing under a blanket fort they'd built in the living room. Lily popped her head out and shouted, "Daddy's home!" Emma followed, crawling out with messy hair and flushed cheeks. She didn't ask what happened at the hospital. She just hugged him tightly, pressing her small body against his legs like she never wanted him to leave again. And in that moment, Andrew knew that no matter how long it took, he would fight for this child, not against her mother, but for her future, for her stability, for her right to have more than just survival, for her right to be cherished. The court date arrived on a clear morning that somehow felt heavier than any storm. Andrew woke before the sun, long before his alarm. He lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts pacing circles in his mind. Every possible outcome, every question the judge might ask, every argument the state could make. He rehearsed it all silently, trying to find a place of calm. But the truth was, no amount of preparation could settle the ache in his chest. Because this wasn't just a hearing. This was the moment everything could be taken or finally made secure. Down the hall, the girls were still sleeping. Lily was sprawled across her bed with books and socks scattered at her feet, the way she always slept, free and fearless. Emma, in the other room, was curled tightly under a pink blanket, her arms wrapped around her stuffed bunny, the same way she'd been since her first night in the house. Andrew stepped into her room quietly and just stood there for a while, watching the slow rhythm of her breathing, the rise and fall of her chest. He wondered if she had any idea what that day meant. Maybe she did. Maybe she felt it in the way he'd ironed his shirt twice, or in the extra kisses at breakfast, or in the way Lily had been holding her hand a little more often than usual. When they finally arrived at the courthouse, everything looked as cold and formal as Andrew had expected. Marble floors, high ceilings, officials in dark suits with arms full of folders. Monica met them at the entrance and knelt to talk to Emma before they entered the hearing room. She didn't use legal language. She just smiled gently and said, "You don't have to be afraid. Just be honest. That's all you ever need to do." The hearing wasn't long, but it felt like it lasted hours. The courtroom was quiet. A judge sat behind a large oak bench, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, flipping through the files in front of her. Representatives from CPS sat on one side. Andrew, Monica, and the girls were on the other. Rachel wasn't there in person. She was still too weak, but she had submitted a written statement through the hospital. The judge began by summarizing the case. A 6-year-old child, previously under state care, had been residing unofficially with an unrelated adult for several weeks. That adult now sought to become her legal guardian with the full support of the child's biological mother, pending recovery. Andrew stood and answered every question calmly, steadily. He spoke about routines, about safety, about the kind of emotional progress Emma had made in his home. He didn't dramatize or embellish. He just told the truth, that he loved her, that he would continue to love her no matter what the court decided. Then the judge turned to Emma and asked, "Sweetheart, would you like to say anything?" There was a pause. The room seemed to hold its breath. Emma slid off her chair and stood next to Andrew, her hand clutching the fabric of his blazer. She looked so small standing there in her blue dress and white tights. But when she spoke, her voice was clear. "I want to stay with Daddy and Lily," she said. "I like it when Lily reads to me. And I like it when Daddy says good night and checks if I'm warm. And when I'm scared, they don't laugh at me." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Do you know who your mommy is?" Emma nodded. "She's still my mommy, but she said it's okay if I stay for now." "And do you want to stay?" Emma didn't hesitate. "I don't want to leave again." That was all she said. But in that moment, it was more than enough. The judge was silent for a long while. Then, she finally closed the folder and looked directly at Andrew. "Mr. Carter, this is an uncommon situation. But the letters from the child's mother, the evaluations from the psychologist, and the clear bond this child has formed in your home have all been considered. Based on what I see here and what I've just witnessed, I am granting temporary full guardianship of Emma Green to you, effective immediately." Andrew exhaled so deeply, it felt like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. He turned to Emma, who had already thrown her arms around his waist. Her face pressed into his coat. Lily joined a second later, squeezing in between them, her voice squealing with happiness, even though she didn't fully understand the legal significance. Outside the courtroom, Monica gave him a nod of quiet approval. "You did it," she said. "Well, all three of you did it." Andrew crouched down to Emma's level and took both her hands. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, her eyes glassy but calm. "Can we go home now?" He smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going home." The drive back was quiet. The girls were tired, leaning against each other in the back seat. Andrew kept glancing at them in the rearview mirror, and as they turned onto their street, the afternoon sunlight hit the windshield just right, casting everything in gold. For the first time in a long while, the road ahead didn't feel uncertain. It felt like a beginning. The weeks following the court hearing passed quietly, almost too quietly, as if the house itself was still adjusting to the new reality. Something had changed. Not loudly or suddenly, but in small, meaningful ways. Emma no longer looked over her shoulder when she laughed. She stopped whispering before asking if she was allowed to eat something or play in a certain room. Her footsteps, once cautious and silent, now had rhythm. She began leaving her shoes in the middle of the hallway and her drawings all over the house, much like Lily had always done. These signs of carelessness weren't frustrating to Andrew. They were reassuring. Emma had begun to feel safe enough to stop asking for permission to exist. Each morning, Andrew drove both girls to school, always with Lily chattering about her day ahead, and Emma sitting quietly, often clutching her backpack like a lifeline. Though lately, she'd begun joining in on the conversation. Sometimes, she would ask questions about clouds or street signs or even what he used to do when he was 6. He always answered, slowly. She was learning how to be curious again. And when he dropped them off at school and watched them disappear into the building hand in hand, he felt an unfamiliar kind of peace. A peace not built on control or success, but something warmer, something earned. Andrew's days remained filled with work. His hotel group required attention. Board meetings, endless proposals, and expansion deals. But he made space, real space, for home, for parenting, for showing up not just as a provider, but as a presence. He declined meetings that ran late. He started cooking dinner more often, even if it meant burning the occasional grilled cheese. He sat with Lily during homework and helped Emma write her first full sentence without any help. I have a sister and a dad and a bunny named Snow. They taped it to the refrigerator. Rachel's health improved slowly. She remained in a rehabilitation facility, still too weak to care for Emma, but strong enough to video call every few days. The first few calls were quiet and awkward, filled with pauses and long stares. Emma would sit stiffly, unsure of how to balance two truths: the mother she missed and the father she was growing to love. But Rachel never pushed. She asked about school, smiled at Emma's artwork, and thanked Andrew every time for giving her daughter something she couldn't. It wasn't an arrangement built on guilt or rivalry. It was built on acceptance and eventually on grace. One night, as the girls lay in bed and the house was finally quiet, Emma came into Andrew's study carrying a book. She hesitated at the door until he looked up from his laptop. "Can you read with me?" she asked. He nodded and immediately closed the laptop. They sat on the couch and she opened the book in her lap. Halfway through the story, she rested her head on his arm. "Do I have to go away when my mommy gets better?" she asked. Not fearfully, but curiously, like someone trying to understand something complicated. Andrew didn't answer right away. Turned the page, then looked down at her and said, "I don't know what the future looks like, but I do know this. You'll always have a home here. You'll always have me." Emma was quiet for a moment, then nodded against his arm. "Even if she wants me back?" she asked. "Even then," he said, "you'll never be without someone who loves you. That's what family is. Not who you came from, but who stays." She didn't say anything else, but her breathing slowed, and eventually she fell asleep right there on the couch. Andrew carried her upstairs and tucked her into bed beside Lily, who shifted just enough to reach over in her sleep and hold Emma's hand. Months passed and seasons changed. Rachel's health reached a stable point, but after long conversations, some tearful, others calm, she made a decision no one had expected her to make so soon. She asked Andrew if he would adopt Emma permanently. "I love her," she said, "but I know she's become someone I can't always reach. And you're already her father in every way that matters." Andrew was stunned by the generosity of it. He had expected shared custody or something transitional. But Rachel saw what was true, not just what was logical. The adoption process began. It was long and formal, but no longer uncertain. Each step felt like confirmation, like breathing again after holding your breath underwater. The final court date was a quiet one. There were no reporters, no long speeches, just Andrew, Lily, Emma, and a judge who looked at the paperwork, then at the three of them, and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Carter. It's official. She's your daughter now. Afterward, they celebrated with ice cream. Lily picked strawberry. Emma, chocolate with marshmallows. Andrew didn't eat much. He was too busy watching the two girls laugh over whose scoop was melting faster. He never imagined his life would look like this. He hadn't wanted children. He hadn't planned for it. But somehow, in all the ways that counted, this had always been waiting for him. That night, back at home, Emma gave him a drawing. It was a picture of their family. Andrew, Lily, Emma, and Snow, the bunny, with a rainbow overhead. Across the top, in wobbly handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for finding me." He didn't need a frame for it. He kept it on his desk, right beside the photo of Lily as a baby. A reminder that love is not always something you plan for. Sometimes it finds you in the shape of a quiet child at a school gate. Sometimes it walks into your life, not asking for much, just to stay. And when you say yes, it changes everything. This story's ending is gentle but powerful. A quiet triumph of love chosen, not inherited. What makes it resonate isn't some dramatic twist, but the way ordinary moments become extraordinary when someone decides to stay. When a man who never planned for fatherhood opens his heart, not just once, but twice. It's not a story about rescuing a child from poverty or pain. It's a story about mutual healing, about a little girl learning to trust again, and a man discovering that success isn't measured in wealth, but in the warmth of two small hands reaching for his. What I love most is that the ending doesn't erase the past. It honors it. Rachel's decision wasn't surrender. It was an act of immense love. Emma's adoption isn't portrayed as a fairy tale ending, but as a beginning full of complexity and commitment. And Andrew, he didn't become a hero by stepping in. He became one by staying. It reminds us that family isn't built by blood or by plans. Sometimes it begins with a quiet, trembling voice asking, "Can I stay?" And someone brave enough to answer yes.